I'm not proud of how quiet I was that day. I sat there with my microwave pasta, listening to my coworker tear into me like I was some kind of lunchtime entertainment. She joked about my clothes, my budget lunch, my contract role. She even asked loud enough for half the office to hear whether HR hired me from a thrift store. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was easier than doing anything else. And the whole time, there was a single thought looping in my head. You have no idea who you're talking to. I didn't come to that company as an owner. Officially, I was a project coordinator on probation, which basically meant a glorified assistant with a temporary badge and nowhere to sit except the edge of whatever desk wasn't being used. I blended in too well. That was the point. A month working on the floor before the board introduced me as the new majority shareholder. My request. I wanted to see what the company looked like when no one was performing for me. Turns out some people didn't need an audience to show who they were. They just needed a target. Emma chose me within 48 hours. Strong personality, fast talker, the kind of person who steps into a room like she's filling it with oxygen. She wasn't my manager, just someone who loved being the loudest voice at the table and had grown comfortable with nobody pushing back. That day in the lunch area, the office smelled like reheated curry and burnt toast. The usual hum of conversation bounced off the glass walls. I sat at the end of the table because it was the only free spot, and I'd made peace with blending into corners. She caught my eye, smirked, and said, "You always eat alone, don't you? Cute." A couple of people glanced at each other. Someone let out a tiny laugh. Someone else immediately looked at their phone. It didn't matter. Once she started, she didn't stop. "This is your third day, right? How do you already look like you've given up?" "You know we have a dress code? Smart casual, not, charity casual. Who hired you?" "Actually, don't tell me. I want to believe it was a dare." My fork paused midair. I didn't say anything. If I had, it would have turned into a scene, and scenes spread fast. I didn't want attention, not then, not yet. But I watched everything. The way the intern tried to change the subject, voice trembling. The way the senior developer stared into his food like it might swallow him if he moved. The subtle wince from the girl across from me when Emma called my job one step above photocopy duty. None of this was new for them. That realization hit harder than her jokes. She kept talking. People kept eating. I kept breathing through the same quiet rhythm I'd learned years ago. Inhale, measure, exhale. Not weakness, calculation, a habit from being in rooms where losing composure meant losing the room. When lunch ended, she tossed her napkin into her bowl, stood, and clapped me on the shoulder like she'd just done me a favor. "Cheer up, new guy. You'll toughen up eventually." Then she walked off, enjoying the stage she thought she owned. I stayed seated until the table cleared. No rush, no panic. Just a slow, almost disappointing certainty forming in my chest. This wasn't a one-off bad day. This was a culture problem wearing a loud voice and too much confidence. When the room emptied, I gathered my lunch and headed upstairs. The third-floor conference rooms were always half dark in the afternoon, blinds half closed, screens asleep. I picked the far left one, the one nobody used unless the nicer rooms were booked. I shut the door behind me, sat, and finally let my posture drop. Not from humiliation, but from having to pretend I was smaller than I was. I opened my laptop, logged into the internal system with my coordinator credentials, then opened a second window and logged into the board portal using my actual ones, the ones tied to the acquisition contract, the ones with access to financials and payroll, and the upcoming transition schedule. Two different logins, two different worlds. I scrolled through the employee roster, a simple list of names, IDs, and salaries waiting for approval on the next cycle. I found hers easily. Her name sat there like any other, a number beside it, a number I would soon have the legal authority to modify, a number she had just laughed at me for not earning. I closed the screen sharply, not out of anger, but because something shifted inside me, a decision settling into place with the weight of inevitability. She had mocked the man she thought I was, but the man I actually was. She hadn't met him yet, and soon she would. By the next morning, the office felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I had. I walked in with the same badge, same job title, same role on paper, but now every glance, every comment, every tiny ripple in the office dynamic meant something else. When people don't know who you really are, they show you the version of themselves they think has no consequences. Emma was already in the break area when I arrived, holding a coffee cup like a trophy, telling a story loud enough for the entire floor to catch pieces of it. Something about a client, something about how our junior staff can barely handle basic coordination. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. A couple of people shifted uncomfortably. Someone pretended to laugh, and once again the room adjusted to her volume like it always had. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and watched the Slack channels roll through message after message. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way she corrected people publicly instead of privately. The way she used sarcasm as a shield. The way her teammates responded with quiet resignation. It wasn't just me she talked over. It was anyone who didn't serve as an audience. Around noon, during a project stand-up, I saw something that bothered me more than yesterday's lunch. The intern, kid barely 20, started giving his update. He wasn't confident, but he was trying. Halfway through his explanation, Emma cut in, Okay, we don't need the autobiography. Just say you're behind. He froze, shoulders lifted, chin dropped. His voice shrank to almost nothing. The project manager blinked but didn't intervene, not because she agreed. Her expression said enough, but because Emma had been around longer, louder, steadier in her presence. When enough people let something slide for long enough, it stops being an issue and starts being a norm. I wrote nothing down, didn't react outwardly, didn't even lift my head fully. But internally, something shifted again, a deeper layer. If this was how she acted with me, a stranger she assumed she outranked, and with an intern who couldn't defend himself, what had this place tolerated over the years? Before my undercover month began, I'd read the HR reports. On paper, the company had no bullying cases, a spotless record, great culture scores, public praise from the CEO about how collaborative and safe the team was. But a company's culture isn't in the documents. It's in the pauses, the silences, the little flinches no one names. After the meeting, I took a slow lap around the office, just walking, observing. People greeted me politely. Some avoided eye contact. A few seemed on edge, not because of me, but because of something ambient, something tolerated for too long. What bothered me wasn't just Emma's behavior. It was how easily she got away with it. A little after 2, I sent HR a quick message. Could I ask you something about team dynamics? New hire impressions. 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Maya, the HR partner, mid-40s. Steady voice, the kind of person who sees too much and says too little, because she's learned that being honest in HR can be dangerous, unless the right people want to hear it. She offered me tea. I declined. She smiled politely, opened her notebook, and asked, So, what's on your mind? I chose my words carefully. I've noticed a couple of interactions in the last few days, I said. Some of them feel off, a bit harsher than necessary. She didn't ask who. That told me enough about how familiar she already was with the answer. She hesitated for a moment before saying, If you're referring to Emma, we've had informal feedback in the past. Nothing actionable. No official complaints. Why not? Because she delivers, Maya said, as if reciting a line she'd been forced to memorize. Clients like her confidence. Leadership likes her results. And people don't want to be on her radar. She said the last part a little too quietly. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood. Companies don't rot from one bad employee. They rot from the people who look away until looking away feels normal. When I left her office, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt irritated, deeply. not with Maya, not with the team, but with the entire structure that allowed someone like Emma to grow unchecked. A company's culture wasn't just what it celebrated, it was what it tolerated. Back at my desk, I started collecting data, not to weaponize it, but to understand the full picture before acting. A screenshot of her message to the intern. Is this seriously the best you can do? A snippet from a meeting transcript where she cut off someone mid-sentence. A timestamp of the lunch incident, just to anchor it in the timeline. I wasn't building a case, I was building clarity. Around 4, she walked past my desk, tapped it with her fingernails and said, "By the way, next time you join a stand-up, maybe speak up. Otherwise we'll assume you're furniture." I looked up slowly, not angry, just present. She smirked, expecting the usual reaction, awkward laugh, lowered eyes, retreat. But I didn't give her any of that. I just held her gaze for a second too long. Something flickered in her expression, a tiny fracture of uncertainty, a warning she didn't understand yet. When she walked away, my phone buzzed with a calendar notification. Subject, board visit schedule. Message, final confirmation for next Thursday. CEO wants your input on agenda. I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb resting against the edge, feeling the timeline tighten in a way that was almost satisfying. Emma thought she had time. The company thought it did too. But the clock had already started winding down, and the next move wasn't hers anymore. The week leading up to Thursday felt like a storm tightening around the office. Quiet at first, then steadily building pressure. People knew someone important was coming. They didn't know it was me. Officially, the agenda said Client Partnership Review, which was technically true. The board was overseeing a major transition involving several accounts. Unofficially, the visit was also an evaluation of the company's internal culture. Leadership just didn't know the source of that agenda item yet. By Monday, the floor buzzed with half whispers, frantic slide decks, and people suddenly caring about fonts. And in the middle of all that noise stood Emma, practically glowing. She had been selected to lead a key portion of the client demonstration, a decision made weeks before I joined. From her perspective, this was her stage, the chance to impress people she believed were far above my pay grade. She greeted me in the hallway that morning with a bright, mocking smile. "Try not to look lost on Thursday, okay? Clients can smell confusion." I didn't correct her. There was no point. Instead, I watched her orchestrate the preparation, barking tasks, interrupting analysts, rewriting other people's work without asking, telling the intern to keep quiet unless spoken to. The team tolerated it because Thursday mattered. Everyone wanted the presentation to run perfectly. Everyone except her, it seemed, misunderstood what perfect meant. Meanwhile, my schedule split in two. In open space, I was the quiet coordinator, helping finalize data, synchronize versions, and ensure the designs match the pitch. In closed rooms, I sat with the CEO and HR director, reviewing compliance notes and structural plans tied to the acquisition. The CEO, Daniel, didn't recognize me immediately the first time we met face to face. To him, I was still a name on the shareholder documents and a silent partner on quarterly calls. When he did realize who I was, his posture sharpened, a subtle shift from polite conversation to strategic attention. "We're glad you're here early," he said. "Good to see things firsthand before the official introduction." I nodded. "There are a few things I think we need to address during the transition." HR, seated beside him, glanced at me with cautious curiosity. "What kind of things?" "Behaviors," I said simply. "Patterns, not isolated incidents." I didn't mention names yet. I didn't need to. I spoke in systems. What happens when a company allows a loud individual to override others? How silence becomes policy, even when no one writes it. Daniel listened carefully. HR took notes. They both looked as though they were hearing things they'd suspected but couldn't substantiate. "During Thursday's agenda," Daniel said slowly, "we can allocate time for internal review." "I'll need that," I replied, "and transparency from the whole leadership team." They agreed. They thought this was about the company at large. They didn't know it was also about one person who embodied every cultural flaw they'd ignored. By Wednesday evening, my role in the preparation became more central. I worked side by side with Emma's team, refining the narrative. She liked having me nearby now, temporarily. She thought I made her slides cleaner, her data sharper, her transitions smoother. She didn't know she was handing me the full map of how she operated. At one point, she leaned back in her chair and said, "You know, you're not bad when you actually put effort in. Keep this up and maybe you'll last a few months." There was no malice in her tone, just chronic arrogance. She said it like it was encouragement. When the room emptied later, the intern lingered behind to pack his laptop. I noticed how he hesitated before speaking, like each word needed permission. "Is she always like this?" I asked gently. He laughed under his breath, humorless. "She's worse when she thinks people are watching." That sentence told me everything I needed. Thursday arrived with a kind of nervous energy that makes fluorescent lights feel too bright. People dressed nicer, spoke softer, moved faster. Emma wore her sharpest blazer, practiced her opening lines in the hall, and checked her reflection in every glass surface. At 9:47 a.m., the client team was called to conference room A. She strode there ahead of everyone, fully confident, projecting the kind of authority she'd learned from no one checking her. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks down the hall. The team followed. I followed last. Inside, the lights were bright, the table polished, the screen ready, and 3 people sat waiting. Daniel, the CEO, Maya, the HR director, and me at the head of the table. Emma walked in smiling, ready to charm strangers, but the second her eyes landed on me, sitting where she assumed a top client should be, her expression faltered, just barely. A flinch, a glitch in her confidence. She recovered quickly, plastering on a smile and turning it toward Daniel. "Good morning. I didn't realize you'd be here for this." "I wouldn't miss it," Daniel said. "We all wanted to be present." She nodded, still searching the room for clarity she didn't yet have. "So, our client? Are they joining remotely?" I folded my hands. "No, there's no client review today." Silence. Her jaw tightened a fraction. "Oh? Then what is this?" Daniel glanced at me, giving the floor to the person who actually called this meeting. And in that moment, watching her wait for an answer she wasn't prepared for, I understood something. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. I stood calm and deliberate, not raising my voice, not needing to. "We're here," I said, "to discuss the culture of this team, and what I observed during my month working with you." The room shifted, a subtle but undeniable change in gravity. Emma blinked once, then again. She realized, finally, that the stage she'd been preparing to stand on was not the one she was walking into. But the real conversation hadn't even started yet. Emma didn't sit at first. She hovered behind the chair, stiff-backed, trying to calculate the situation. Her eyes darted between me, Daniel, and Maya, searching for some anchor to interpret what was happening. When none appeared, she finally lowered herself into the seat across from me. I could see her building her defenses. Confident posture, controlled breathing, chin raised. These weren't signs of strength. They were signs of someone who'd never been held accountable and wasn't ready for the moment when she finally would be. I spoke plainly. For the last month, I've been working with this team in a coordinator role, observing workflows, communication patterns, dynamics. I let the words settle, not rushed, not sharpened, just true. What I saw wasn't a problem with productivity. It was a problem with how people are treated. Emma gave a tight, almost brittle smile. If someone had concerns, they could have talked to me directly. "They tried," I said. "You just didn't listen." Daniel folded his hands. Maya kept her gaze steady. They were letting me lead, not out of deference, out of recognition. It was my responsibility, and this time, they weren't going to step back from doing what was necessary. I continued. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm here because the culture you've helped create isn't sustainable. People are afraid to speak in meetings. They're anxious around you. They change their tone when you enter the room. That's not leadership. It's survival. She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. Let me finish. I listed examples, not exaggerations, verifiable, documented, date-stamped, the comments and stand-ups, the sarcastic messages, the way she dismissed the intern's work, the lunch incident, word for word, not because it personally bothered me, but because of how normalized the behavior had become around her. With each detail, her expression shifted, not to shame, not to remorse, to something closer to fear. A fear built not from losing control, but from finally being seen without the mask she'd worn so confidently. When I finished, Maya slid a folder across the table toward her. This outlines the company's formal response, she said. Emma touched the folder like it might burn her fingers. Daniel spoke next, tone calm but firm. This isn't punitive, it's corrective. You're being removed from client-facing leadership, effective immediately. You'll remain in your role, but under a structured performance plan focused on communication, collaboration, and conduct. Emma stared at him, stunned. You're replacing me? With who? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. She looked at me then, really looked, with a recognition she'd been trying to avoid since the moment she walked into the room. Who exactly are you? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't enjoy the reveal. I simply told the truth. My name isn't just on the coordinator roster. It's on the ownership documents. I'm the majority shareholder who finalized the acquisition last quarter. I asked to work on the floor before the transition to understand the culture firsthand. Silence stretched across the room, clean and heavy. Her face didn't crumble, it hardened. That was the part that told me everything about who she really was. She didn't regret what she'd done. She regretted that it finally mattered. When the meeting ended, she walked out without a word. Not defiant, not broken, just unmoored. Her world had shifted in a direction she never imagined possible, and for the first time, she had to move through it without assuming she owned every room she entered. Over the next few weeks, the office began to change in ways people immediately noticed. Not dramatic waves, quiet recalibrations. The interns spoke more in meetings. The project managers stopped deferring out of habit. Slack threads became less sharp, less performative. People breathed easier without noticing they were doing it. We rolled out new guidelines for communication, clear, practical, enforceable. Maya held small group sessions on respectful discourse that didn't feel like corporate theater. Real policies followed real problems, and for once, the team felt protected instead of observed. As for Emma, she tried to adapt. For a while, she followed the performance plan guidelines mechanically, like someone completing punishment rather than growth. She stopped interrupting, but not out of consideration. Out of calculation, she avoided the intern entirely. She lowered her voice, but not her ego. It became obvious that she wasn't fitting into the new version of the company, not because she was incapable, but because she wasn't willing. 3 weeks later, she requested a private meeting with me. She sat across from me in a much smaller room than the one where everything shifted. No blazer this time, just a quiet, measured posture. You didn't have to do it like that, she said. I didn't do anything you didn't do first, I answered. I just made the consequences visible. For the first time since I met her, she didn't have a comeback. No sarcasm, no smirk, just a tired exhale. She slid a letter across the table. Her resignation, not angry, not bitter, just finished. When she left, the door swung shut softly behind her. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy. It was relief. 2 months passed. The office settled into something steadier, healthier. I transitioned out of the coordinator role and into the mezzanine-level office I'd avoided occupying until the right moment. People knew who I was now, but not in a way that created distance. If anything, it closed it. They didn't see a hidden owner anymore. They just saw someone who cared enough to listen before speaking. On the first payroll run, I approved personally. I scanned down the list of names, each one representing someone who deserved a workplace where dignity wasn't a luxury. Her name wasn't there anymore, not because I removed it out of spite, but because she chose to step out of a space where her old behavior no longer worked. I clicked approve. The system processed. The cycle moved forward. And for the first time since joining the company, so did everyone else.